On May 2nd, get ready to escape. ISIS escaped from Transylvania. The goddess next door and John Haynes must escape a horde of vampires on the hunt in this horror-filled ISIS series adventure. Get ISIS Escape from Transylvania in paperback and e-reader May 2nd. One of my viewers asked me to take a look at some more recent episodes of the CW's Arrow. And the reason why he wanted me to take a look at these more recent episodes of Arrow was because he believed he saw some racism going on as related to John Diggle, Oliver Queen's black partner, who was codenamed Spartan. And I wasn't able to take a look at this CW episode of Arrow that came up last week because there was a Mets game on here in New York City on the CW partner CW11. However, I was able to take a look at that episode on Saturday night, and what I saw on Saturday night was John Diggle getting his nigger moment. Now, you've heard many YouTubers like Mr. Superboy223 use the term nigger moment, and I'm going to explain what that means right now. A nigger moment is what happens when a black man who involves himself with white people finds out that these white people do not see him in the same way that he sees them. And when they give him his nigger moment, they show him that they see him as just another Negro, and it's an effort to put that black man in his place. And what I saw on last week's episode of Arrow was John Diggle getting his nigger moment. And that nigger moment came when John Diggle decided to ask Oliver Queen for the second time for the hood of the Green Arrow. And Oliver Queen told him that he could not be the Green Arrow again because the Green Arrow allowed him to be the best version of himself. Now, I'm going to deconstruct what that statement means because there were a lot of racial undertones in that statement where Oliver Queen said the Green Arrow allowed him to be the best version of himself. Basically, between the lines, what Oliver Queen was saying to your John Diggle was that this Green Arrow costume allows me to be the best white man I can be, and because it allows me to be the best white man I can be, you cannot be on the same level as I am. So when he made that statement, he was basically telling John Diggle he could never be on the same level as he was. And that was the slap in the face that John Diggle had a hard time dealing with because your John Diggle, throughout a good chunk of the episode, was wondering why he was angry and wondering why there was something wrong. And I knew as I was watching this episode what was wrong with John Diggle was he was finding out that the white people who he thought valued him showed him how little value he had to them. That's why I said that this episode was John Diggle's nigger moment because he found out that what I knew watching this show for the last 6 years, that he was nothing more than Oliver Queen's butler. And as Oliver Queen's butler, his job was to stand at his side, help him clean up his messes, and to help him do things that he needed done. He was basically there to be the faithful servant. And when Oliver Queen asked him to be the Green Arrow, he asked him from the position of the butler because Oliver Queen was overwhelmed with being the mayor of Star City and caring for his son whose mother had recently died. And because he was overwhelmed in all of his duties, he needed John Diggle, the butler, to come in and fill in for him as the Green Arrow. Unfortunately, John Diggle had an injury in the first episode that led to him not being able to use his arm effectively, and then he had to go out and wind up buying some of this vertigo drug in order to be able to use his arm. And because he had these arm issues, Oliver Queen had to literally step back in as the Green Arrow and be the hero all over again. And what that was, again, was showing John Diggle his role in this situation. Unfortunately, because the John Diggle character was the butler, he didn't understand where his position was. His position was always the butler. It was always to be the fill-in, and it was always to be there to help Oliver Queen out of a jam. But what your John Diggle thought he was going to do by being the faithful butler, the dedicated servant, and the supportive guide to the white man was he thought that he could use this position to elevate himself to a level that is equal to the white man. And that was John Diggle's big mistake as it related to being a hero, because his whole reason for being a hero was to be Oliver Queen's butler. And that's what made him really angry, was the fact that he thought he could use this position as Spartan to eventually step up, back up to the level of the Green Arrow. And that was coming from a position of weakness, because when you are coming from a position of weakness, you are not going to be seen as a leader, because that's where John Diggle's, again, his other big mistake was he believed that he could come from that position to a leadership position when you're a hero, you don't ask to be a hero. And that was one of the other problems with John Diggle in the last two episodes. He's asking to be the Green Arrow. If he looked at Oliver Queen, he would understand Oliver Queen never asked to be the Green Arrow. He became the Green Arrow based on what he wanted to do, and he defined himself as the Green Arrow. But your John Diggle, because he doesn't understand how things work, he believes that he can be a hero in the same way that Oliver Queen is, by asking for his validation and approval. And this is something many black men believe that they can do. They believe if they come from the subordinate position and are kowtowing to these white people, they'll eventually see what's so great about them and then eventually reward them by giving them some sort of title. And usually when they don't get their title, and that's what leads to them getting very angry. And that's what happened to John Diggle. He got very angry because he felt he should have gotten this mantle of the Green Arrow. He felt he earned it. He thought he earned this hood. But that hood was designed for Oliver Queen because it allowed him to be the best version of himself, because he defined what the Green Arrow was on his terms. And that was the big problem with John Diggle. He didn't understand that in order to be a hero, you have to define what that means, and you have to do things on your terms. And what the big problem with John Diggle was, he thought he could be the Green Arrow on Oliver Queen's terms. And when a black man goes out here and tries to define his masculinity and manhood on a white man's terms, he is coming from a position of weakness. If there's anything I learned from watching Netflix's Luke Cage, it was this. Luke Cage defined his heroism on his own terms. He set his own standards. He set his own rules. And he did what he wanted to do, and he became the hero he wanted to be, based on the man he wanted to be. In contrast, John Diggle thought he could be a hero based on Oliver Queen's terms, and that showed how weak a man he truly was. And as I watched him in that episode, sitting there trying to figure out why he was so angry and what was so wrong, it made me shake my head, because I knew again what had happened to him based on my own personal experience working in places like the Food Emporium, Strive, and City College, where I had many of these N-word moments and understood that if you come from that submissive position, they are never going to respect you, because that's what John Diggle wanted. He wanted that hood because it represented the idea that he could be equal to Oliver Queen and that he could be respected in the same way. Unfortunately, the only way for a man to get respect is to go out here himself and define things on his own, establish things on his own terms, and do things the way he wants to do them. And what happened with John Diggle that really related to racism was the fact that he again thought Oliver Queen would treat him with the same respect and put him on the same level as he was. And he thought that he could use the Green Arrow hood to be the best version of himself. Not understanding that you can never be the best version of yourself wearing a white man's hand me down costume and being in a white man's role. Because what that black man, John Diggle, was doing was putting himself and saying to himself, I'm second best. Because when he put on that Green Arrow costume, basically he was saying to Oliver Queen, I will accept second best. I will accept your hand me down costume. I will accept being number two, and I will never see myself as number one. And when he took the mantle back and told him that it could be the best version of himself, basically he was telling John Diggle again he was not his equal and that the white man is always going to be number one. The white man is going to be supreme. The white man is the leader. The white man is the boss. And that's what John Diggle agreed to when he decided to become the sidekick Spartan. He agreed to do things on Oliver Queen's terms, and he agreed to be a hero to Oliver Queen's standard. And when he did that, again, he was telling everyone that he was willing to take being number two, and as long as he worked for him, he would be number two. Now, the hard lesson I saw in this episode that John Diggle didn't learn was that he needed to be a hero on his own terms. Because right after he left Oliver Queen in this episode and left Team Arrow, he goes over to his white wife and Argus. And that shows me that he really has not learned anything about being a black man. But that's par for the course with a Berlanti production show, because a Berlanti production show has a hard time presenting black men in a balanced perspective. They always see black men as weak on these shows, and the way we saw John Diggle, that was just sad. He goes from the white man to the white woman, not understanding that another N-word moment is waiting for him. And the reason why it's waiting for him is because he keeps doing things on other people's terms. He keeps trying to be a hero following somebody else's rules. And in order to be a hero, a man has to define his own terms for being a hero. You don't see Batman sitting up here saying that he's going to be a hero by Superman's standard. Nor do you see Superman going out here to be a hero on Batman's standard, because his standard is his standard. His standard is related to his mission, his goals, and his experience. And that's one of the reasons why I said John Diggle was unqualified to be the Green Arrow in the first place, because the Green Arrow was defined based on Oliver Queen's experiences on that island and based on the skills he learned on the island. So he took the skills and experience he learned on that island and decided to dedicate it as part of his mission to defend Star City. It wasn't anything related to John Diggle's experience or anything related to John Diggle's standard, so he wouldn't understand why those things were important overall to the mission of the Green Arrow. And that's again why I say he was being a hero on somebody else's terms, and that's not the reasons why a man goes out here and does anything. When I look at this John Diggle character, again, I just see what happens to many black men out here who believe they can take the role of the butler, thinking that it's going to be the way people will see them as a man. No, when you are in the role of the butler, they see you as a servant, and in some ways they see you as a boy. They don't see you on the same level as a man. And when you give your best in the role of a butler or a boy, they do not appreciate it. So the best thing John Diggle could have ever been on Team Arrow was Oliver's butler. He could never be a man on his level. And this is why he was so upset throughout the episode, not understanding why he was upset. He didn't understand that he was finally taking a look at himself and seeing himself from a red pill perspective, seeing himself as the emasculated position that he had, seeing the emasculated person that he was, and that in all of his years of being a faithful servant to your Oliver Queen, he would never be on the same level as Oliver Queen. He would never be the shot caller because he was getting the shots called to him from Oliver Queen from day one. And then he had other people like Renee going behind his back and telling on him. And that should have told him something right there. If he was any sort of critical thinker, he would have said to himself, if I'm supposed to be the team leader, why aren't these people respecting my authority? Because if I'm the leader, they're supposed to respect my authority and follow my lead. But no one followed John Diggle's lead in the early episodes when he wore the Green Arrow costume because they saw the hierarchy of white supremacy. The white man was always supreme in Team Arrow. They always followed his direction, and they always believed that his direction was the only direction they could follow. What happened to John Diggle was he got upset because he saw his role in Team Arrow was always going to be the backup man, always going to be the butler, and no one who anyone would really regard in any way, shape, or form. And that's just the way it is for black men who go out here to go working for the white man. They will never value anything you do, value anything you contribute. They will never value anything you bring to the table. And it doesn't matter how much you buck, dance, and bojangle, the way John Diggle did in the last two episodes, begging Boss Queen for the chance to put on his hand-me-down costume. They will never see you in the same way they see that white man does. All they're going to see is a black man filling in wearing a white man's suit. They will never see you as a black man who stands on his own. Because again, what makes a black man a hero is him being the best version of himself, for himself, standing up for what he believes in, and fighting for what he's passionate about. Because when a black man goes out here, he has to understand that he cannot work for somebody else's standard. He has to follow his own standard because these white people will not value you because they don't see you as having any sort of value outside of minor and menial labor. And that was one of the things I believe that really hurt John Diggle the most, was seeing that his role as Spartan was nothing more than being Oliver Queen's butler. And the entire episode, what made it really powerful, in addition to Diggle getting his N-word moment, was the fact that it was a very powerful episode that told the truth about white liberals. Now, when it comes down to the Green Arrow character, he is one of the most liberal characters in all of comics. And as I've said for many years, the liberal always is the biggest racist in the room. And we saw that racism play out in this episode of Arrow in the fact that Oliver Queen passive aggressively gave John Diggle the manhood of the Green Arrow, and then when John Diggle was having problems, he then came back in to take it over, knowing all well that John Diggle was not qualified to be the Green Arrow, basically turning John Diggle into an affirmative action hire, and then making it where he was set up to fail, and then when he failed, then telling him that the only way for the Green Arrow, for him to be the Green Arrow, is because it allowed him to be the best version of himself. Because in order for the team to be led and for the team to be at its best, it has to be led by him, because he is the best version of himself and he is the best person to lead the team. And that was the underlying undertones of the racism presented in that episode of Arrow. And in the episode where John Diggle found out that the value of a black man's labor is zero, even when he's giving his best to white people. And that's one of the reasons why black people need to be the best versions of themselves, for themselves, and put black first, because if you don't value you, no one else will. And I'm hoping that's the lesson everyone got out of that episode of Arrow, an episode which really showed how racist white people are, even when they say that you're supposed to be an equal, you're not actually an equal. If you want to pick up my newest ISIS series book, ISIS House of ISIS, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com. You can pick it up in paperback and e-reader formats on Kindle Unlimited. And if you want to help me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.